Welcome to StateScoop's Priorities Podcast, brought to you by Scoop News Group. Every Thursday, you'll get insights into the state and local government technology community. You'll hear from top leaders across the state and local world, and learn about the latest news and trends across the industry. I'm your host, Sophia Fox-Sowell. There's no denying that generative AI is the emerging technology of the moment. State and local governments are racing to incorporate generative AI into their agencies, from chatbots and foreign language translators to tools that help summarize complicated documents. As the first American presidential election year in the generative AI era,
the 2024 election cycle.
2024 will inevitably serve as a test case for both the spread of AI-generated election disinformation and the efficacy of states attempting to regulate it. With the election only 4 months away, election administrators are readying themselves for the possibility of generative AI's misuse in spreading misinformation. Dozens of states have introduced or passed legislation addressing deepfakes and voter transparency that could impact how election officials and political campaigns operate nationwide. With the ability to produce, aggregate, and summarize content rapidly, state and local officials, as well as technology experts, have touted generative AI as a useful tool to cut down menial tasks and streamline daily operations. But when it comes to elections, generative AI makes it easy to poke holes in the integrity of America's electoral process. The biggest example is deepfakes. Deepfakes, synthetic videos and images that use a person's likeness, have been concerning lawmakers for years. The Political Deepfake Database, created by Northwestern University researchers, tracks the proliferation of deepfakes targeting politicians, elections, or policy. As of June 27th, the database has logged 400 political deepfakes since they first gained notoriety in 2017. In the past year, several high-profile incidents in America gained national attention. In January, voters registered as Democrats in New Hampshire received robocalls that used audio generated with artificial intelligence to mimic President Joe Biden's voice.
You know the value of voting Democratic when our votes count. It's important that you save your vote for the November election.
It's still unclear who was behind that deepfake, but the intention was clear: to discourage voters likely to support Biden from going to the polls during New Hampshire's primary election. And it's not just Democrats that have been targeted. Last September, a video of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announcing that he was dropping out of the 2024 presidential race made the rounds on social media.
After the last week's events, including my poor performance at the debate as well as President Trump rejoining X, I've realized I need to drop out of this race immediately.
The video's creator wanted both DeSantis supporters and opponents to think he had stopped his presidential bid. Both are examples of the type of voter suppression and disinformation lawmakers and election officials hope to prevent by passing laws that regulate the use of generative AI.
I was aware of it before I was Secretary of State. Before I was Secretary of State, I was a state senator, and I had tried to push for bills to regulate AI because I knew it was going to be a threat.
Steve Hobbs is the Secretary of State for the state of Washington, one of dozens of states that have enacted legislation to govern how political campaigns use generative AI. With the recent emergence of generative AI tools such as OpenAI's ChatGPT that can produce realistic images, videos, and voices in a matter of seconds, both campaigns and state policymakers are adjusting.
I don't think people understood the nature of the threat. I think people were looking at the good aspects of AI, and there's certainly good things that come about it. I don't think people were equating what was going on. Now, I think that beyond this election, there are other instances that occurred that people are starting to be aware of. For example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia used a deepfake of Zelensky, urging his armed forces to lay down their arms. Luckily, it was caught in time. And so I think when you see more of these things coming out, and of course the media like yourself talking about it, I think the awareness of it is starting to be in the minds of our citizens. And I think people are concerned now and would like to see some regulation that could be wrapped around it.
In 2023, dozens of states introduced or passed legislation related to deepfakes, synthetic media, or deceptive media, including the state of Washington. Washington passed a law last year requiring a disclosure label on synthetic media intended to influence an election or depict a candidate for office. But with so many public officials at the local, state, and federal level concerned that artificial intelligence could sow misinformation and impact the election, why do most of the laws addressing generative AI focus on disclosure agreements? Labels that alert anyone watching or listening that what they're consuming was generated using AI, and not more restrictive policies.
I would tell, I wanted something stronger. I did want something stronger, but this is in the art of politics. Sometimes you have to do what is possible based upon the votes that you have out there. What I wanted to see is maybe not necessarily an outright ban, but hold the social media platforms accountable. Because if I'm running an ad and I'm paying money to a social media platform, they should know who I am. They should know that this is generative AI. Really, they need to be held accountable because you need to know where that money is coming from, and you need to know if the candidate gave permission to do that.
People have always attempted to alter or misrepresent the media to influence public opinion, and the growing trend to curb the ability to spread false news about elections or political candidates didn't start with the advent of generative AI or even the 2016 presidential election, when Donald Trump popularized the term fake news. During the Revolutionary War, Ben Franklin concocted propaganda stories about murderous scalping Indians working in league with King George III to drum up rebellion. In the 1800s, American racial sentiments and fears toward slaves were powerful in producing false stories about what would happen should they be set free. And German propaganda of the 1930s infamously stoked anti-Semitism, aiding the rise of the Nazi Party. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, all 50 states have some form of a criminal impersonation law that prohibits people from intentionally misrepresenting themselves as another person in order to deceive or commit fraud. Some of these laws, like in Wisconsin, were passed in the 1970s, long before the internet was invented, and may be applicable to generative AI and deepfakes. However, the challenge of imposing stronger regulations against generative AI, like what Secretary Hobbs suggests, is complicated by a few factors.
I think really we need to get the heart of the problem and go directly to the social media platforms. Otherwise, they're just going to put out stuff and they're not going to know where it comes from.
But even social media platforms, with their vast resources, can't always find the source of disinformation once it goes viral, or aren't incentivized to remove it because it drives higher engagement on their platforms. And of course, there's the intersection of state laws with constitutional protections and federal laws concerning free speech and online content.
I think that the tendency to lean towards disclaimers is partially for First Amendment purposes, a sort of, wanting to carefully cabin the requirements that are imposed. And partially, I think it's a more general sort of free speech concern, sort of wanting to have a less restrictive requirement imposed on people in this space.
That's Mekela Panditharatne, a lawyer with the Brennan Center for Justice's Democracy Program. Mekela tracks a range of issues, including state and federal policies concerning technology and AI.
I think that there should be guardrails in place to mitigate some of the potential harms. We know that generative AI tools can produce misinformation, they can hallucinate, they can produce false information about the election process or election issues in some cases.
In May, the Senate Rules Committee approved 2 bills that, if passed, would regulate the use of generative AI in political ads nationwide.
Since last year's midterm elections, there have been these tremendous advances in publicly available generative AI, and both the deepfake tools and chatbot technology have grown rapidly in use, in proliferation, and in sophistication as well. And they really, the tools crossed critical thresholds over the course of months and have really evolved dramatically from the infancy of the underlying technology about a decade ago. And, this year, as you mentioned, we're seeing the first federal election where large numbers of people have access to these tools at this level of sophistication for little or no cost. And we're seeing voters routinely access information that is not just curated by AI, but is actually produced by AI. So, in some ways, I think we've seen legislators act rather quickly on this issue, given the rapid progress of the technology. But as we've talked about, they are specifically looking at addressing an issue that disproportionately affects them as well. So the issue of political deepfakes that in many cases misrepresent candidates or portray them as saying or doing something that they did not say or do. So I think they do have a vested interest in this topic.
Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar introduced the AI Transparency and Elections Act to amend the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971. The bill would mandate transparency in the use of content that is generated by artificial intelligence in political ads. If passed, these ads must include a statement saying generative AI was used to produce any images, audio, or videos. The Protect Elections from Deceptive AI Act would restrict the distribution of deceptive media relating to federal candidates in political ads or issue-based ads to influence a federal election or fundraise. The bill would also allow federal candidates targeted by the synthetic media to have the content taken down and to seek punitive damages in federal court. The ban extends to a person, political committee, or other entity that distributes materially deceptive content intended to influence an election or raise money fraudulently. Consistent with the First Amendment, the bill has exceptions for parody, satire, and the use of AI-generated content in news broadcasts. While Mekela is happy to see regulation addressing generative AI moving forward at the federal level, she isn't holding her breath that Congress will pass the laws anytime soon.
It's heartening to see that there is some bipartisan support for these bills, but it is often hard to get to sort of the final step in Congress, which is passing a law. In this case, states are really moving forward much faster than Congress has, and they are really taking the lead on this issue.
As of June, the Voting Rights Lab, a nonpartisan organization that analyzes election-related policies, has tracked 118 bills in 42 state legislatures, with provisions against using AI to produce election disinformation. The most popular policy approach is to require disclaimers on content generated by AI, like in Washington, Wisconsin, Arizona, Florida, and many others, similar to disclosing who pays for political ads.
Well, I think particularly in the campaign context, when we're talking about bills that specifically target political ads and paid ads, campaigns, PACs, and so on, there is a long provenance of recognizing campaign finance disclosure requirements and the propriety of those disclosure requirements under the Constitution, given the sort of informational interest that citizens have in accessing that information. And I think a similar interest applies here, the sort of informational interest that citizens and voters have in knowing who is speaking to them and in what way they're being addressed.
But the onus isn't just placed on campaigns to be transparent with their media or state governments to enforce legislative policies. Some of the responsibility to discern whether something is true or false has fallen to individual voters.
I think the most important thing for the listeners out there is that right now there are not strong laws. Obviously, in our state, we've got disclosure laws, but at the end of the day, if it's a malign actor or someone who doesn't want to play the rules, it really relies on the individual.
Secretary of State Steve Hobbs again.
So please take the time to look at what you're seeing and verify it. Is this person real that you're receiving this information? Is it verifiable? Did the candidate approve of this? Go call the campaign. Maybe the campaign doesn't even know about this ad that came out about them. So really, it's all on us right now at this particular moment until the federal government catches up.
With the advent of generative AI, part of being a responsible content consumer is now taking the extra step to investigate the information you're being presented. For some, that means searching for news articles reporting similar information or tracking down the original reference material on a government or campaign website. For the more technologically savvy, it might mean using AI detection software to see if a photograph, audio clip, or video was produced with generative AI. The Brennan Center for Justice reports that AI deepfake detectors have an over 90% accuracy rate. But there are some loopholes. Detectors trained to identify deepfakes using existing methods will be less effective against those produced using brand new techniques. Deepfake generators can also add specially crafted edits to their content that, though imperceptible to humans, can trick deepfake detectors. However, as Mekela points out, amateur detective work can sometimes lead down a different type of rabbit hole.
For example, searching for generative AI tells in images or video, like impossibly smooth skin or misshapen hands. Even AI detection tools can sometimes have limited accuracy. And so, what we've been encouraging voters to do is to fall back on some of the time-tested practices, like going to a credible fact-checking website, going to an AI incident database, or submitting content to such fact-checking websites for verification, and adopting a critical eye towards content that seems sensational or surprising or triggers an emotional reaction in you. Sometimes going to a search engine is not the best first step, because it can, based on a user's search history, can sometimes turn up misinformation. But going to those credible fact-checking websites, credible news organizations can be the best path forward.
Most people probably don't stop to consider that their own search history may in fact be biased, that using search engines to conduct independent research when encountering content that seems suspicious might lead you further from the truth. So what can election officials do to combat this type of misinformation and protect elections?
They can, develop crisis communication plans so that if an AI incident occurs that does potentially affect the right to vote, so misrepresents the electoral process in ways that are troubling, or, for example, manufactures a crisis at a polling place that hasn't actually occurred, that they can get that information out to voters as quickly as possible, and that they've thought about the best ways to communicate that information. Election officials can establish large networks of contacts with local media, with civic organizations, including in hard-to-reach communities, as well as sort of ethnic media outlets, to make sure that they have trusted voices that can disseminate that information as well.
Beyond working with the media, Secretary Hobbs says the best way to combat misinformation is with education.
At my level, I want to make sure that we have our cybersecurity team ready to deploy, both to protect our own voter database and to assist with the 39 counties. We are constantly scanning social media to see what any false narratives are out there. And the best way to combat misinformation, disinformation, is with the truth. So when we see something trending, let's say it says the tabulation machines are being messed with, then we know that we'll put out our messaging saying, no, because they're not connected to the internet. In fact, go down to your county auditor and see the tabulation machines yourself. You'll notice they are not connected to the internet. So these are the messages that we have to convey to the citizens out there, because we don't want another January 6th. So now we want people to actually see for themselves, like go down that county auditor and actually see them receive the ballots, open the ballots, process the ballots, count the ballots. And you can actually see that. You can talk to the Secretary of State's office. We'll give you the information out there. Learn more about what happens to your ballot. That's what I encourage people to do, and we're going to do everything we can to educate the citizens of our state.
Generative AI, like any emerging technology, is not inherently bad. Maybe it and other technologies can even help improve elections.
The other thing that AI could do potentially down the road, now we're a mail-in ballot state, so that means that we identify people by their signature on the ballot that they have on there. Right now, we use human beings. It's 2 people who scan each and every signature and match it against the database that we have with their driver's license signature, but you could speed up the process by using AI to quickly scan the signature and look at the database and say, okay, this is a match, and move it along. Now, because the public mistrusts about AI, and because you could have a issue with the programming, you probably still want to put in something in there where maybe 1 every 10 signatures will be pulled randomly to be checked by human beings to see if the AI scanner actually got it right. So that's not happening now, but could certainly happen in the future.
However, since the technology is so new, state and local governments are still exploring how to use it effectively and responsibly. So don't expect to see generative AI at your local polling location anytime soon.
I think there are beneficial uses, potentially also helping election officials simplify the language that they're using, making it more accessible. Again, making sure that humans are reviewing the content at every stage. So yes, I think there are potentially good uses for it in the election space, but they always have to be paired with appropriate safeguards.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of the Priorities Podcast. Be sure to check out the rest of our generative AI reporting that tackles cybersecurity, procurement, and more at StateScoop.com. Thank you to our guests, Washington Secretary of State Steve Hobbs and Mekela Panditharatne of the Brennan Center for Justice for joining us. This episode was produced by me, Sophia Fox-Sowell, Carlin Fisher, and Adam Butler. It was edited by Colin Wood. That's it for the Priorities Podcast. Tune in next week for the latest news and information technology from leaders across the state and local government world.